Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Too many towns and villages have vacant and derelict buildings, which, as well as being eyesores and potential dangerous sites, are buildings which could support local businesses and provide housing. We need a whole-of-government approach to this issue, with local authorities and departments working together. Minister, can you outline what measures you're putting in place to address vacant and derelict buildings?
Thank you. Thanks, Deputy. And I propose to take questions 9 from that's Deputy Kearns, question 44 from Deputy Curran, and question, it was down here, question 118 from Deputy Smith together. So I'll take all of those together, if that's okay, Cathaoirleach?
Absolutely, yeah, proceed.
Thank you. Now, the answer. The refurbishment of vacant properties is being addressed by a number of initiatives delivered by my department in line with the commitments contained in our rural future. In April, I announced investment of 81 million for 25 landmark projects for funding under Category 1 of the Rural Regeneration and Development Fund. The projects will combat dereliction, increase the vibrancy of rural towns and villages, and regenerate town centre buildings. A call for the RRDF Category 2 projects opened in May. I've also announced funding of €15 million that's available under the 2021 Town and Village Renewal Scheme. A key focus of this year's scheme is to renovate derelict and vacant buildings in our town centres, including for residential living. I have increased the maximum grant available under the scheme to 500,000 to permit projects of additional scale to be funded. I will also shortly be announcing a new €2 million scheme to fund the development of town master plans, which I expect will identify strategic actions tailored to address vacancy and support town centre living in each town. There are a range of other initiatives outlined in our rural future which will contribute to addressing vacancy in our towns and villages. In particular, an interdepartmental group has been established to develop a town centre first approach and to bring forward recommendations to government. As part of its role, this group is also considering the suggested actions from the report of my department's Town Centre Living Initiative, which was published last year. Finally, as part of Budget 2022 and in the context of the Town Centre First approach, we will examine the scope to introduce new supports and incentives for the refurbishment of vacant properties to increase town centre living. So what I would say is that all of our schemes, whether it's the Rural Regeneration Development Fund, and as I said, 81 million for 25 flagship projects. So what we're doing here is looking at old buildings, whether it's old cinemas, whether it's old courthouses, old convents. For example, we had funding provided to Donegal County Council to convert an old department store into a wonderful new complex, and we had funding then to convert an old cinema as well. Old convents were funded in, I think it's Ballymahan, an old school. Again, these buildings will be brought back into use either as community facilities. There's libraries in some of them. There's going to be remote working hubs. So it's multi-purpose buildings. So really, I want to see investment in these to bring them back into use, and so that they can be converted for 21st century use, because the way we're living is changing, and of course remote working is a wonderful opportunity for rural Ireland. So I think, why not convert some of these properties and use them for that purpose now? So thank you, Deputy.
Deputy Kearns.
Thank you, Minister. I think we all acknowledge this as being an issue that needs intervention, and we all know how disheartening it is for local communities like West Cork to see buildings that were formerly thriving family businesses and homes fall into disrepair. In many cases, tidy towns and property owners take on the responsibility of cleaning them up, but we also have cases like in Mitchelstown in North Cork, where the facade of the building recently collapsed. My colleague Councillor Ross O'Connell has been working on these issues in Goleen and Bantry in West Cork, which are examples of where even one or two vacant buildings in a town or village can have a disproportionate impact. You know, that feeling of the high street feeling empty and derelict. You've highlighted the Town and Village Renewal Scheme as a means of bringing vacant and derelict sites back into use. But this is a multi-purpose and competitive scheme which is vastly oversubscribed. So I'd like to ask what specific interventions you're proposing under that scheme. Thank you. The recent rural development policy recognises the issues involved and proposes a number of measures in response, as well as the Town and Village Renewal Scheme. It mentions encouraging local authorities to use CPOs for derelict buildings. So Minister, will you use your influence to prompt councils to take more action in this area? I think we all know there are tools available to local authorities which are underutilised, and encouragement from you could lead to greater action on that front. The policy also mentions providing financial support to local authorities to bring vacant properties back into use as remote working hubs. Can you outline what sort of funding will be made available and the timescales involved? Vacant and derelict buildings are an ongoing issue that needs policies and funding from government and local authorities. We need to combine a carrot and stick approach to prevent some owners from just sitting on properties and help communities in bringing these sites back to life, and crucially encouraging councils to use the tools that they do have to really address this issue.
Vacant.
I want to add to that. I welcome that an interdepartmental group has been established, and I'll await the Minister to outline those 4 pillars that you referenced. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to say some of the specific actions that are being considered by the interdepartmental group: incentivise the use of vacant buildings through taxation strategies, explore financial disincentives for vacancy and underuse, explore alternative models for access to finance for the adaptive reuse of vacant buildings, resource and support local authorities to invest in and demonstrate confidence in their town, and establish a cross-cutting town centre first approach. So there has been some really good examples, and I'd like other local authorities just to take note, because there are some towns and there are a lot of derelict buildings, but the local authority really needs to work with local communities, and they will have a plan for their county obviously, and some towns have benefited, such as Kinsale Library project. That's approved for funding of 2.157 million from the first call of Category 1 applications. It's the relocation of Kinsale Library to a listed council-owned heritage building, which will require a major restoration and fit-out. If you go to Boyle Regeneration, I know Deputy Curran will be very familiar with this one, funding of 2.137 million for a series of linked projects, including the refurbishment of the vacant Old Royal Hotel into an enterprise hub. So there is good work going on there, and I want to see more of that, because I think that it's the right thing to do. And if you look back at how towns were planned years ago, there's a book recently written by a lady, I think she was on the radio yesterday, and we can look back to what happened in the 1800s and how towns were planned then, and I think we could take a leaf out of that book as well.
Thanks, Minister. We're going to skip past question 90 on to question 91 in the name of Bernard J. Durkin.